first mistake was assuming the footsteps came from below. They did not. Not exactly. Every single night, at 1:13 a.m., for 17 nights in a row, the guest staying in room 314 at the Blackwater Inn heard someone walking beneath their floor. The steps were slow, measured, completely deliberate. It lasted for exactly 11 minutes, every single night. And then, total silence. The hotel management blamed the plumbing. Then, they blamed the heating system. Then, the natural expansion of the wood in the wintertime, drunk guests, wild imaginations. But the hotel schematics were very clear. Room 314 was on the 3rd floor. Directly beneath it, there was only a sealed laundry corridor, an old maintenance wall, and a vacant space that had been permanently closed off since 1996. There was no basement, no crawl space, no hidden room. There was absolutely nothing down there. And yet, every guest described the exact same thing. Someone was pacing back and forth, directly beneath the bed. Not outside in the hallway, not above the ceiling, right underneath them. It felt as if the hotel had built another floor, just to put someone there. It lasted for exactly 11 minutes, every single night. And then, total silence. The hotel management blamed the plumbing. Then, they blamed the heating system. Then, the natural expansion of the wood in the wintertime. Then, drunk guests. Then, wild imaginations. But the hotel schematics were very clear. Room 314 was on the 3rd floor. Directly beneath it, there was only a sealed laundry corridor, an old maintenance wall, and a vacant space that had been permanently closed off since 1996. There was no basement, no crawl space, no hidden room. There was absolutely nothing down there. And yet, every guest described the exact same thing. Someone was pacing back and forth, directly beneath the bed. Not outside in the hallway, not above the ceiling, right underneath them. It felt as if the hotel had built another floor, just to put someone there. Her name was Eleanor Vale, 42 years old. Night manager, divorced, no children. She had worked at the Blackwater Inn for 9 long years, and she knew the anatomy of that building better than anyone. She knew which ice machine jammed in the winter. She knew which stairwell light would flicker right before it started to rain. She knew the guests by the sound of their stride, who walked heel first, who dragged their luggage, who paused outside their doors before entering. Eleanor believed that buildings could learn people, not metaphorically, but literally. She once told a coworker, "If enough people sleep badly in the same room, the room itself learns how to keep people awake." Everyone laughed. Eleanor laughed too. But later that night, she wrote that exact sentence down in a private notebook beneath the front desk. That notebook would later become Exhibit C in the investigation. At first, Eleanor treated room 314 like a practical problem, a fixable problem. That was her nature. She believed deeply in maintenance. To her, maintenance was a form of faith. If the towels are folded, if the light bulbs are replaced, if the locks are checked, then reality itself will probably stay exactly where it belongs. For a long time, this faith protected her. But eventually, it became dangerous. Because Eleanor did not look away. She documented everything. And horror does not begin when someone screams. It begins when someone writes down the wrong thing with perfect accuracy. According to a maintenance report filed on February 11th, 2008. Eleanor investigated the second-floor corridor at exactly 1:26 a.m. There were no pipe vibrations, no mechanical errors, and no people present. But while standing beneath room 314, she experienced a heavy, suffocating sensation that the ceiling height was wrong. The corridor appeared lower than normal by several inches. The sensation passed after about 30 seconds. If you look at the original document today, you can see where her pen hesitated. There is a long ink scratch right under that sentence. But she left it in. Because accuracy mattered. 3 days later, she brought a measuring tape to the second-floor east corridor. She already knew the length by heart. It was exactly 32 meters. She had measured it herself back in 2004 when the carpets were replaced. 32 meters. Exactly. But on the night of February 14th, 2008, the tape read 33.1 meters. She measured it again the next night, 33.4, then 33.8, then 34.2. The hallway was growing, not violently, not dramatically, but quietly, like condensation spreading across a pane of glass. Reality was not breaking apart. Reality was accommodating something, and that was much worse. Because broken things will resist, but accommodating things will always make room. At 1:13 a.m. on February 16th, the front desk phone began to ring. The caller ID on the screen showed extension 214. Room 214 had been completely sealed off since 1996. A massive pipe burst had collapsed the interior wall back then. The door had been removed, and the entire space had been bricked over with solid drywall. No guest had stepped foot inside room 214 in 12 years. There wasn't even a phone line connected to the room anymore, but Eleanor answered it anyway. The recorded audio log contained several seconds of heavy, dead silence. Then Eleanor's voice speaks. "Hello, this is the front desk. How can I help you tonight?" More silence. Then she asks, "Sir?" A man's voice finally answers. He sounds incredibly tired. He says, "You are right above us again tonight." Eleanor pauses. "Excuse me?" The voice whispers, "Room 314, third floor. You keep putting people directly above us. We can actually hear them dreaming." The line went dead. The call lasted for exactly 11 minutes. And the entire time the man was speaking, the sound of heavy footsteps, thudding against a floorboard, could be heard clearly inside the recording. It was as if the sound had found a way to occupy the tape itself. The photograph was a total accident. That is why people trusted it. Intentional photographs invite suspicion, but accidental ones feel honest. A honeymoon couple staying in room 318 took a quick snapshot of each other in the hallway after dinner. The lighting was poor, the flash was bad, and there was a lot of digital noise. Nothing special. But in the background, halfway down the second-floor corridor, right beneath room 314, there was a door. It was a dark forest green. The paint was heavily chipped. There was no room number plate on it. But there was a warm, yellow light leaking out from the threshold beneath it. The problem was simple. There was no door there. The wall was supposed to be solid, continuous drywall from the vending machine to the emergency exit stairs. There was no closet, no utility panel, nothing. Yet in the photograph, the door was clearly there, and standing right in front of it was Eleanor Vale. Or something wearing Eleanor's clothes and posture. Her back was turned to the camera. Her head was slightly tilted to the side. She was perfectly still, just listening. When Eleanor was showed the photo a few days later, she didn't deny it. She only stared at it for a long, quiet minute and whispered, "I don't remember standing there, but I remember hearing myself breathe." In her notebook entry dated February 18th, Eleanor wrote that the hallway felt significantly longer after 1 a.m. It was becoming physically difficult to walk through, as if distance itself had become thick and heavy. She counted 14 ceiling light fixtures instead of 11. There were only 11 fixtures in that hallway. She knew this because she had replaced 3 of them herself the previous autumn. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "I think the building is making room." On the night of February 20th, Eleanor finally found the green door in real life. The hallway lights flickered once. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic flicker, just a low, tired, electrical hum. Suddenly, the vending machine was gone. The fire extinguisher cabinet was gone. The corridor simply extended another 20 meters into pure darkness. And at the very end stood the green door. Paint chipped. No number. Warm light underneath. The footsteps were no longer echoing beneath room 314. They were pacing right behind that door. Eleanor walked toward it, keeping one hand flat against the wall. Later, she wrote the exact same sentence 3 times in her notes. The hallway felt deeper than the hotel should have been able to contain. When she reached the brass doorknob, the pacing inside suddenly stopped. Total silence. Then, a man's voice spoke from the other side. It was ordinary, calm, exhausted. He said, "We thought you would come down eventually." Eleanor stumbled backward, not because of the voice, but because he had used the word down. The hallway she had just walked through was perfectly level, but in that exact moment, she understood with absolute certainty that she had descended somewhere very deep. She opened the door 3 nights later, on February 23rd. She opened it after promising herself she wouldn't, after writing 6 pages in her diary detailing exactly why she shouldn't. But curiosity is not the opposite of fear. Sometimes, curiosity is simply what fear becomes when it gets too tired. Inside the green door was a standard hotel room. The ceiling was low. It had warm yellow lighting, faded brown carpet, and the faint, rhythmic hiss of a radiator. There was a bed, a television, a suitcase, and a pair of shoes placed neatly on the floor. An ice bucket was sweating onto a folded towel. Everything was ordinary. Painfully ordinary. Except the ceiling was too low. It felt emotionally wrong. It looked as if the room had been physically compressed by years and years of people trying to sleep inside it. A man in his late 50s, wearing a worn gray coat, was sitting on the edge of the mattress. His hands were folded, and he was staring down at the carpet. He didn't look surprised to see her. He only said, "You are a lot louder upstairs this winter." Eleanor asked him what room this was. He answered, "Below yours." She asked him what floor they were on. The man looked confused. Then, he looked up and said, "The floor beneath occupied rooms." It wasn't the basement. It wasn't a maintenance tunnel. It was the floor beneath occupied rooms. It was as if the hotel had developed a subterranean layer, made entirely out of what people leave behind. Not bodies, not ghosts, but emotional residue. Every sleepless night, every silent divorce finalized over a crackling phone line, every lonely traveler eating dinner out of a plastic container on the edge of a bed, every phone call that ended in heartbreak. The hotel had kept all of it, and eventually, it needed to build a floor to put it all in. This is the part that was missing from the initial reports. The part Eleanor did not write down clearly until much later. While she was standing inside that lower room, she suddenly heard footsteps pacing directly above her head. The man in the gray coat looked up at the low ceiling. "See?" he said quietly. "They never walk softly up there." Eleanor asked him who was upstairs in room 314. The man didn't answer. Instead, he simply pointed to the old television set in the corner. The screen was static heavy, playing a live black and white feed of room 314. On the screen, Eleanor could see the bed, the lake painting, the open bathroom door, and she could see herself. Eleanor, sleeping soundly under the heavy blankets. Eleanor stepped backward in horror. She was standing right here in the dark. So who was the woman asleep on the television? On the screen, the sleeping Eleanor suddenly opened her eyes. She didn't look frightened. She didn't look confused. She looked as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She looked directly into the camera and whispered, "Stop leaving." The television screen instantly cut to black, and that was the moment the phenomenon changed. Before this night, the hotel was just making space, but after this night, it began choosing what belonged down there. By March 1st, guests across the entire third floor began reporting dreams that did not belong to them. These weren't vague, symbolic dreams. They were highly specific. They all contained the exact same details. They dreamt of a lower hotel floor, of heavy footsteps walking directly over their heads, of pipes breathing inside the walls, of doors with no numbers, and a green door at the end of a long, dark hallway, where people sat silently on the edge of beds, just waiting for the guests above them to stop moving. One guest actually drew a map of the hallway upon waking. The sketch matched Eleanor's impossible corridor perfectly, right down to the placement of the green door. That guest had never seen the photograph. He had never spoken to Eleanor. He had checked into the hotel only 6 hours prior. That was when the staff stopped treating the building like a malfunctioning piece of property. They began treating it like a sentient entity. A house can be empty, but a hotel cannot. Even when there are no guests inside, a hotel always remembers the feeling of being filled. An audio cassette recording was recovered from Boiler Access Tunnel B, dated March 3rd, 2008. Amidst heavy tape hiss, you can hear Eleanor breathing heavily, with rhythmic thuds echoing beneath the audio. Eleanor's voice says, "The maintenance access ends here. There shouldn't be another corridor." A long pause. The footsteps continue. Eleanor whispers, "That is underneath us again." A man's voice answers from the darkness, "No, it is above." Eleanor gasps, "Who is there?" The male voice replies, "People sleep upstairs. We keep the weight of them." Eleanor asks, "What does that mean?" There is a terrifyingly long silence. Then the voice says, "Someone has to stay beneath the dreaming." And then, dozens of muffled voices begin to whisper all at once into the microphone. "Rooms remember occupancy. Rooms remember occupancy." The tape abruptly cuts out. The investigators eventually uncovered a vital piece of information. Eleanor Vale had actually lived in room 314 herself for 8 months straight during her divorce back in 2001. Her husband had left her in November, and Eleanor had moved temporarily into the Blackwater Inn while the property was being divided. Room 314, 8 months, completely alone. Her former co-workers remembered her exact routine from that dark year. The television kept on a low volume. The bathroom light left on all night. her shoes aligned perfectly beside the bed, and Eleanor, waking up at exactly 1 a.m. every single night, unable to fall back asleep. A co-worker remembered Eleanor once saying, "Hotels are just buildings, full of people pretending not to be lonely at the exact same time." Nobody understood what she meant back then, but investigators later realized that room 314 had become the anchor, because Eleanor had emotionally occupied that space longer and deeper than anyone else. The room wasn't haunted, it was imprinted. There's a profound difference. A haunting invades a space, but an imprint accumulates over time. Eleanor had left so much of her grief in that room that the hotel eventually mistook her physical absence for an unfinished stay. On March 11th, 2008, Eleanor made her final entry in her notebook. She wrote, "I think the lower floor is made from unfinished occupancy. It is not ghosts. It is not dead people. It is simply the people who remained emotionally inside these rooms, long after they left them physically. The hotel kept all of it, and eventually, it needed to build a floor." Further down the page, her handwriting becomes erratic. "I don't think the footsteps are pacing anymore. I think they are growing under the floor, holding up the immense weight of the people overhead." And at the very bottom of the page, written in a faint, trembling hand, "I am starting to miss the room below mine." On March, matted 14th, at exactly 1:13 a.m., Eleanor Vale vanished completely. The hallway security footage captured her entering the second-floor corridor. She walks normally at first, but then her pace slows down, and slows down, as if the space around her is expanding. At 1:16 a.m., she comes to a complete stop, not in front of a door, but right in front of a blank, empty wall. She raises her hand to the drywall. She waits, and then she steps forward. She does not disappear into thin air. The camera shows the pixels around her body smearing and distorting. A sudden depth opens up where the flat wall should be, and Eleanor simply continues walking, straight into the solid structure, as if the hallway had always been deeper than the camera lens could see. The footage remains completely stable afterward. There is no glitch, no static, no camera cut, just an empty, quiet hallway for the next 7 hours. At 8:02 a.m., the housekeeping staff found her shoes, placed neatly outside the door of room 314. They were pointing toward the room, as if she had finally returned to check in. But she wasn't upstairs. County inspectors entered the abandoned East Wing 2 days later. They ran thermal imaging scans beneath the building's foundation. The scans revealed massive heat signatures buried deep underground. They weren't random geothermal anomalies. They were large, distinct, rectangular shapes. They were perfectly parallel, stacked vertically on top of one another, like hotel rooms descending deep into the earth. Some of the rectangular shapes were icy cold, some were warm, and others flickered rapidly, like an occupied room when someone repeatedly turns a bathroom light on and off in the dead of night. No excavation was ever approved by the state. No logical explanation was ever found. The Blackwater Inn stayed open for 3 more years, though it absolutely should not have. The complaints just kept piling up. Shared nightmares, missing time, guests waking up with thick mud on their bare socks, people hearing massive ice machines cycling directly below their mattresses, and metal room keys appearing in the lobby, stamped with room numbers that had never existed on the hotel registry. The hotel was condemned and closed permanently in 2011. It sits empty, at least officially, in 2022. 3 urban explorers broke into the decaying east wing of the hotel. One of them was carrying a high-end digital audio recorder. The final audio clip recovered from his device lasts 46 seconds. There is no music, no narration, just the sound of heavy flashlight clicks, crunching glass, and nervous breathing. One explorer whispers, "Hey, why does it sound so incredibly crowded down there?" Another answers quickly, "Shut up, man. There is no down there." And right after those words are spoken, footsteps begin to echo. Not just one pair, hundreds of them. Slow, measured, heavy footsteps, walking directly beneath the floorboards they are standing on. The audio recorder begins to heavily distort from low-frequency vibrations. You can hear a heavy door opening somewhere nearby in the dark. It doesn't slam. It opens carefully, as if someone downstairs is trying very hard not to wake the guests sleeping upstairs. Then, a woman's voice speaks. She sounds perfectly calm, perfectly normal. She says, "Could you please walk a little softer tonight? Some of us are trying to sleep beneath you." The recording abruptly cuts to static. No bodies were ever recovered from the site. The final piece of evidence associated with Eleanor Vale was found inside the ruined hotel guest ledger. It was opened to March 14th, 2008. Page 314. Her handwriting was verified by forensic experts. There was no timestamp, no long explanation. There was only one single sentence written directly beneath the last official check-in entry. "The lower floor is very full now." And a bit further down the page. "But it is so much quieter when everyone finally stops leaving." And beneath that, written so faintly that the investigators almost missed it entirely, "Please, do not rent the rooms above us.